How you guys doing? Welcome. My name's Pete. Brandon is away. It's good to have you here. I was thinking this morning, I've only been to a Catholic service a few times, but one of the things I greatly appreciate is how everybody at a Catholic service knows exactly when to stand and sit down. We at Rise City have not mastered that quite yet. This morning, I think I was like, my wife was getting mad at me. But, whatever. Sit, stand, do whatever you want to do. If you want to stand while I talk, it's a little weird, but go ahead. I don't care. Whatever you want to do. It's America. July 4th week. Oh, wow. So, much like a quick story, this week, or last week, I forget, I was at work, and I was busy. I mean, like the kind of busy that you kind of forget what you're doing 5 minutes ago and don't know what you're doing in 5 minutes. And I'm sitting in my office, and somebody's talking to me about a bill or something. Somebody else is standing in my doorway waiting to talk to me as soon as this person's done. Papers all over my desk. I'm like, and my phone rings. And my job actually, my phone, I'm kind of on call, different things. And so this person's talking to me like face to face, and I kind of give them that apologetic face scrunch, like, and I just real quick, I grab it and like, hello, what can I do for you? This is Pete. And waiting for some, important thing, and I get, hi, Steve. I'm like, oh, crap. I'd like to tell you about a great opportunity. Your company can save money if you'll just give me 5 minutes. And I did not respond like Jesus. I said something to the effect of, I'm already regretting the last 5 seconds, click. And you don't really click anymore. Sorry. It loses the force. Politely back in my pocket. And I was just like, oh. But then I looked up, and the person I'm talking to and the person in my doorway and like 3 other employees in the hallway are like, and I realized with the look of shock and frightened faces that I could have handled that better. And at the time, I don't know what it is. I have a hard time with people selling me stuff, especially when I don't know them. It's difficult, which does create a bit of a conundrum because that's kind of what my wife does for a living. So, like, go get them, honey. But because my wife does that for a living, there's a part of me that does feel really bad when I respond inappropriately because I know that person that called me has a story. He probably does that as a way of putting food on his kid's table. He's not trying to bug me. He's not trying to be a jerk. He's trying to make a living. And there's that part of me that sort of immediately felt bad. I just felt kind of guilty and like, oh, man, I could give people more grace. But more so, the thing that I brought that up is because when I looked at these people that work under me, I quickly had this like thought that jumped into my head, and I wanted to like push it down really fast with them. Did I just communicate to them that I'm someone that you shouldn't come to for help? Did I just basically say, Pete's a guy you do not want to go bother, right? And I was thinking, like, do I communicate that? Do the people that I work with, the people that I live with, do they feel comfortable coming and talking to me? Do the people that I manage feel like my office is a space that they can come in and really get help and not have their ear, yelled at or something? Do my kids believe? No, that's a bad example. They ask me for crap all the time. But they will do that. But as annoying as it is when my kids are constantly asking me for stuff, what's worse? My kids always coming and asking me for stuff, or my kids never asking me for stuff? Because when people approach you and want help, seek whatever from you, it actually is saying something about you, isn't it? It's saying something about me as a father when my kids do or don't want to approach me. It says something about me as a boss, as a manager, when my employees, the people that I'm leading, trying to do life with here, trying to work with, do they look at my office like, oh, crap. I don't want that. It says something about me. Am I someone that they're afraid of? Am I someone that they actually feel I won't help anyway? Do they think I'm incompetent and there's no reason to ask me? None of those things are actually things I want people to think of me. So when people come and ask me for things, there are times that I'm like, but I'm also, on the other side, kind of glad knowing that people on some level feel comfortable coming to me and asking me for help, talking to me. I remember a few weeks ago, my wife and I were driving up to Anaheim. We were going to Medieval Times for Father's Day and taking the kids up, something to do. And we got almost there, and our transmission blew up on the freeway. And there's that sense of like helplessness when you're sitting on the side of the freeway, cars are strewn, and you can't do anything. When it comes to cars, I'm a moron. I don't know. The mechanic always wants to point at me like, well, if you look here, you'll see that. Oh, yeah, I see the flux capacitor's wrong. I don't know. And because I don't know anything about cars, I know I'm going to get ripped off, and I don't know what to do. And there's that sense of helplessness, and you just like, can somebody help me? Who can I talk to? And one of the interesting ironies is the person that I called was the person that was standing in my office during that previous phone call. He knows everything about cars. I'm like, hey, man, sorry to bug you on a Sunday. I know it's Father's Day, but he's like, no, what do you need? He like walked me through it. We like talked for like an hour. He was helping me mess with things, got my car back. And I thought to myself, I want to be the kind of person that people feel comfortable coming to. Because so often I see how great it is in other people. And I have this question for us this morning. I'm talking about us as people, but what about God? Do you see God that way? When you think about God, do you think of the angry boss who's just going to yell at you if you go in his office? Do you think of the incompetent boss who isn't going to know the answer anyway, so why bother? Do you think of the boss that's just kind of off in his own world and probably doesn't care what you're doing and won't help you? How do you think about God determines how you approach him. And Jesus has a lot to say about this. And this morning, as we're continuing this series about the greatest sermon ever, which is looking at the Sermon on the Mount, collections of teachings by Jesus in the book of Matthew, he's actually going to hit on this really, really strongly and directly. I want to read it together in Matthew 7, verses 7 through 11. It's just a short little passage here. Jesus says this. He says, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Search, and you'll find. Knock, the door will be open. Everyone who asks receives. The one who searches finds. The door will be open to the one who knocks." Like, go ahead, ask, come on in. And then he gives the reason for it. He says, "Suppose your son asks for bread. Which of you will give him a stone? Or suppose he asks for a fish. Will you give him a snake? No. But you're evil. You're broken. And yet you know how to give good gifts to your children. How much more will your Father who's in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him?" And what I believe a verse like this forces us to confront is ultimately, how do we see God? How do we think about him when we're in need? How do we approach him? What is our view of him? Because that will impact the way that we have a relationship with him. Let me just pray for us, and we're going to unpack this verse together and just explore what it means for us this morning. God, I just ask you to reveal yourself this morning. I think of that statement Paul made when he said all the stuff that he knows about you is kind of worthless next to actually knowing you, and we want to know you, God. We want to know who you are. We want to see you face to face. We want all of the lies and the misconceptions and the half-truths, all the things that might ruin our relationship with you, to be confronted with the truth of who you are and let your truth tear down every other lie. I pray that we'd see you this morning, God, and learn to know you as a father. I pray this in your name. Amen. All right. So Jesus is just jumping right in, right? Telling his followers, ask, go to God, talk to him, pray, and he'll respond. But what's so key about this passage isn't just the command to ask, but the reason why he's giving to do it, the motivation behind it. He explains why. And it's not because God is a vending machine who, if you push the right buttons and do things appropriately, the piece of candy will come out like you want it. That's not the reasons he's giving. The reasons he's giving is relational. He's giving you the character of God. He's talking about who God is and letting that be the defense of prayer. And I think this is so important. If nothing else, and I've been in church for a long time. I grew up in church. I think my parents left the hospital when I was born and went to church. I've often heard people stand up on a place like this with a podium and a microphone and make me feel really guilty that I don't pray. You need to pray more. I know, I suck, I'm sorry. No one has ever guilted me into praying well, ever. It's never happened. I've never been like, I do feel guilty, I'm gonna go do that. People I don't know, I don't respond well to guilt. I usually just get more guilty and shut down. But what I do respond to is when people motivate me because something positive. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's not saying, you're stupid, stop being dumb and start praying. He's saying, I know prayer is a hard thing for you, but let me actually give you the motivation for it, and you'll realize I'm not guilting you. I'm offering you something amazing. And he was offering them to a culture that needed to hear something amazing. Because one of the keys to understanding this is who these people were that he was talking to. Now, in Matthew specifically, he probably had a collection of Jewish people around him, his disciples. But talking to kind of the world at large at the time was very different. And he mentions these people a few times. So what I'd like to do is, while this passage doesn't specifically say it, it's in a collection of passages that we've already hit on over the last few weeks. I want to go back and look at a few verses, one of them that Matt touched on a few weeks ago, when Jesus is also talking about prayer. And he says this in Matthew 6, verses 7. He says, when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they'll be heard because of their many words. And then later in verse 31, he says, don't worry, saying, what shall we eat, what shall we drink, what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things. Your heavenly Father knows that you need them. Interesting kind of dynamic here. Jesus is teaching his people about prayer and their relationship with God, and he's comparing it and contrasting it to these people he's calling pagans. Now, pagan is just a fun word. I don't know. It's like San Francisco, pagan. I don't know. I like the word pagan. Whenever I think of the word pagan, I remember this like old movie. I think it was like a Dragnet remake where everyone was like, had like big like goat faces, like pagan. Yeah. Let me explain the word pagan to you because it's an odd word. In the Greek, this word is actually ethnos, where we get our word ethnic or ethnicity. And because, why would it be ethnic? Well, because the Jewish people had their own sort of ethnic group. They looked at everybody else in the world as a different ethnic group. But not ethnic in the sense of like the color of your skin or something, but more about the way that you approached God. So people of other ethnicities, according to the Jews, were people that worshiped differently. They had a different view of religion. And so they would use this word ethnos or ethnic, and it's often translated as pagan. Here's what the word pagan essentially means in its basic context. First of all, a pagan was not an atheist, all right? A pagan was not someone who didn't believe in God or gods. They were polytheists, meaning they believed in many gods. To be a pagan was to essentially say there are a plethora of gods out there, many of them. I just used the word plethora in a sermon, and I'm so proud of myself. There were many of them, many gods. Very religious, right? And so you believe in a lot of different ones. And they're gods quite unlike the ones that Jesus represented, and thus the distinction concerning prayer. So Jesus is alive at a time when the Romans kind of controlled most of the known world, and they came from the Greek culture, so this Greco-Roman culture. Greeks were very polytheistic. They were pagans. So all the people in Asia Minor that Paul goes to, the whole world surrounding Israel is pagan. And a lot of pagans now live in Israel because Rome and Greece have brought a lot of their people in. There's a pagan sitting, overseeing the entire city of Jerusalem named Pontius Pilate, a person who worshipped many different gods. So the Greeks, and this is kind of the way this works, and this dates back thousands of years before this as well. Essentially, it's the belief that all of the world, all of nature, all of human life, everything that happens is governed by these powerful beings, okay? They called gods. And that means everything, whether it's the rain or having babies, going to war, politics, your personal life, right? Whatever happens in your life is probably dictated by the gods. They're responsible for maintaining order, to governing all that exists. They keep everything sort of working. This is the basis of paganism. Paganism believes that everything that's happening in the world is being run by these gods, and there's a lot of them out there. I can worship any of them, some of them, all of them. You want to be nice to all of them, but you may have like one or two specifically that your family or your city worships specifically. But for the most part, you just believe they're all out there and they're all doing their thing. And so all of nature is being governed by them, everything. The rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, the rains, the crops growing, marriage, childbirth, health, war, all this stuff, even death and life itself, are the gods controlling this. And this was their way of making sense of nature, of their world. They didn't have scientific laws, the way that if something broke or whatever, it's like, oh, a god did that. That's kind of the way they thought. By the time you get to Jesus' day, the Romans had a very sophisticated view of this. They had a pantheon of gods they inherited from the Greeks. The Greeks had Zeus and Poseidon and Aphrodite and Ares, and the Romans renamed him Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, the same group of gods that were in charge. But essentially, this is why this matters. Like, where are we going here? Because these gods controlled everything, if you need something, well, they're the ones that can help, right? Like, they're in charge. They're running the world. If I need my crops to grow, I need rain. I need to pray to the gods for it to rain. If my wife and I want to get pregnant, we need to pray to Aphrodite and pray for fertility, right? If we're going off to war and I'm going to pray for protection for my son, I'm going to pray to Ares, God, take care of my son, or help us win this war, whatever. Like, everything you need in life has to go through these gods. I want to pray for protection. I want to pray for help. I need money. I need whatever it is. My kids are sick. My crops aren't looking good. I'm not sure whether to take that new job. I feel like my boss is trying to kill me. Whatever it is, I need the gods to help me. You need their help. This was how they understood the world. But some of you might say, well, I can relate to that, I guess, right? Here is the world Grand Canyon difference that we need to understand. And it'll change so much and help us understand why Jesus said, don't be like the pagans. Because when these gods were described in the ancient world, and we have a lot of writings and stuff we know a lot about them, at the heart of their understanding of the gods was that these beings were essentially powerful, but very human-like. And that's an important thing to understand. These gods were human-like. They had this incredible power. They could raise the sun or whatever, but they were far from perfect. Very, very flawed. All of the things that you would look at another person and say, oh, that's wrong, you could point to the gods and say the same thing. They had normal human qualities. They were petty. They would get jealous. They were very selfish. They were extremely arrogant. They were often inept and bad at their jobs. Imagine that. They're bad at their jobs? What? The stories we have from the ancient world show that the gods would fight with one another. They would get jealous. They would be sleeping with each other and trying to sleep with humans, and they were immature. And they had this constant longing to be praised by people. This childish, rich person, oh, just tell wonderful things about me. That's how people viewed the gods. They could be confused. They didn't know everything. Listen to Jesus say, your father already knows you need that. A pagan would be like, they don't know my kid's sick. I got to tell them. They're not omniscient, whatever. They could make mistakes. They could be wrong. They could commit crimes. The gods could commit crimes. They were extremely emotional. They have joy, but also anger, man. They would get mad. They could feel shame. The gods could even feel fear. How do you know if you anger a god? I don't know. What do you do if you anger a god? I don't know. What do we do? They were responsible for justice and maintaining order, and often accused of doing a terrible job at it. People be like, you're supposed to be keeping people, you suck at your job. A lot of writings in the world where people just being mad at the gods for being terrible. And even if you and your family did everything that you thought you could to appease them, to make them happy, you followed all the rules that you ever heard of, and you went to the temples and did the things, you did all that you could possibly think to do, there was still no guarantee they were going to hear you or care about you. Nowhere in the ancient world is there ever a reference to a God being called faithful. Nobody called gods faithful. Gods were fickle. Gods were, maybe not, I don't know, we'll see how I feel. From the human perspective, the gods were stronger, but they weren't better, right? They weren't better people. They were sometimes even worse because they had so much power. The way that you and I look at celebrities, like, you guys, you're terrible. Like, that's how they would look at the gods, right? No one would ever use the word good or loving to describe an ancient god. The gods weren't good or loving or faithful. They were just rich, entitled things up in the sky that I gotta appease so my life goes okay. You just hope they would do something good for you, not that they were good. But again, this wasn't guaranteed. There's no promises. There was nothing written down in stone that said, well, if you do this, God, and no, who knows? They could change their mind. You couldn't really count on them. And ultimately, they didn't owe humans anything. Like, you're just kind of, some of the ancient literature actually talks about the reason the gods created you. One of the great writings from the Mesopotamian era says that the gods actually created you to bear their drudgery because they were tired of working so hard. Like, that's why you exist. Yay. So pagans were like, well, I'm just a nobody little peasant farmer and you're important, but I need something from you. What do I do? In theory, you could communicate with them, but nobody really knew how, or whether they would even care to listen to you. How would you get their attention? So living in this world and trying your best to survive and thrive and make the most of your life meant trying to figure out how to appease these things up in the sky and make them happy and just like wave your arms enough to get their attention. And they would go to all kinds of lengths. I mean, when I read sometimes about these cultures and some of the things stick out to me that are vile, right? How could you take your child and just kill it? Like, that seems something that's, I don't know, you did what? But then I try to put myself in the shoes, in the mindset of a person who's so desperate for help, so desperate from favor from the gods that they'll do anything. And maybe I can go to the ultimate extreme, I'll get their attention. I'll start cutting myself, I'll kill animals, I'll kill my son, whatever I need to do. Like, I just need your attention. I need to get you to look at me because I'm so desperate for help. I'm stranded and I have to have somebody to help me. What can I do? You desperately want the God's favor. You yearn for it. The Greeks would use the word charis, grace. I want them to look down on me and give me some. What do I have to do to get your grace? Would be the question the pagans would ask. There's no answer. The gods, they're fickle. Why would they care about you, a lowly peasant? How could I possibly hope to get their attention? What could I do to turn their grand eyes my way? And this led to forms of worship that were just a shot in the dark, just people guessing, I don't know, let's try this. Maybe if I do this, let's build a little idol and sing it songs or something. What are we going to do? One of their fundamental beliefs was this. This actually makes a lot of sense. At some point they said, well, I mean, they're like kings, right? Well, how do we treat a king? Well, we dress it nice and say really nice stuff to it and give it nice food. Let's do that. So that became how you approach the gods. So you could go to a temple and you would hear the priests or the people wanting something from the god would go into the temple and they would just start, laying it on thick, right? Like, oh, great and mighty Zeus, defender of the weak and wonderful through the ages and powerful and wise. And just like, how many words can I say to maybe get its attention? And then look what Jesus says to this. Jesus says, guys, don't be like the pagans. Don't be like that. They go into the temple and babble on and on and on, thinking their many words will be heard. Remember that? I'm going to pop that verse back on the screen. They think they'll be heard because they're many words. Let me just sort of give you a thought here. I'm not attacking these people. Jesus was not attacking these people. He wasn't saying the pagans are stupid, they're dumb people. He was saying, guys, don't live that way, because that's a terrible way to live. Just get it out of your mind that you think you have to do that you think you have to go to these massive extreme lengths to get the God's attention. Jesus is like, don't be like that. God already was listening before you started talking. And if you're a pagan, you'd be like, wait, what? You don't need to worry because God already knows what you need. How would God already know what I need? I haven't said anything. I haven't burned a sacrifice. What are you talking about? No, God knows everything. He knows the hairs on your head. You don't have to be like the pagans. You don't have to look at God the way that they look at their made-up gods. Petty and jealous and fickle. The pagans would keep babbling, just blow enough smoke up their butt and maybe he'll respond. Jesus is like, stop. That's not who God is. And all their religious activity, the idols, the temples, the sacrifices, the lengthy prayers, it's all arbitrary and nothing is even sure. No one knew if it would work. No one knew if the gods were listening. No one knew that even if you are listening, do you even care? Like maybe you're just sitting up in a cloud laughing at me. I don't know. What am I to you, right? Who am I that I'm mindful of you? Nothing. I'm no one. You would live your life trying to obey them because you were afraid of them and you really just wanted something. Your hope was just, could they possibly just give me some scraps off their table, right? Me, a mere peasant, a nobody. And half the time, you have no idea if it's working. Maybe all the time, you have no idea if it's working. What a depressing, chaotic, and uncertain life to live. Is it any wonder that when Jesus talks to his people about prayer, he wants to point out in no uncertain terms not to think that way? It's not just the action is wrong. He's not saying, stop using so many words. Right? He's like, what's up here is wrong. What you think about God, what they think about God is wrong. And it's leading to all this silly behavior that's meaningless and pointless. It's not that they're bad or insincere. I bet these people were very sincere. These people would spend their whole lives trying desperately, what do I have to do to appease you? They were very sincere. They were just wrong, though. And Jesus is like, they're wasting their time. Because at the end of the day, they thought about God wrong. Because your prayer life is always a reflection of your view of God. And this is what I meant by motivation or guilt. Because for a lot of us, prayer is a guilt trip, right? Because God is angry and God is like, you better pray, right? Or you think God isn't really listening, he doesn't care about you, whatever, I don't even know if I can get his attention. And these views of God affect whether or not we approach him. Some of us have it in our brains that God is that angry boss who's just ready to slam the phone on us. I don't want to bother him. This is a complete side note. There's a reason that there's an entire Christian tradition among Catholicism of praying to Mary. And the reason was because at some point in the medieval period, when people kind of stopped reading the Bible for themselves, people started thinking that God was this angry judge and that Jesus was like a shield. Like, God's really pissed off, and Jesus is like, don't do it, God, And so they'd be like, Jesus, save us. But Jesus was kind of busy, so we're like, well, hey, let's talk to his mom, and maybe she'll keep God's anger away from us. And praying to Mary for safety and protection was ultimately praying that God wouldn't smite you. This is a complete misunderstanding of who God is. Your prayer life has been shaped by a wrong view of God. If you're afraid to pray, if you think prayer doesn't work, your prayer life has been shaped by a wrong view of God. If you see prayer as an inconvenience or just a bothering thing, a waste of time, your prayer life has been shaped by a wrong view of God. I like A.W. Tozer says, what comes to your mind when you think of God is the most important thing about you. I think it's such a powerful statement. Like, what you think about God is so vital to the way that you live your life. As long as you think God is angry, why are you ever going to approach him? And so the key issue for Jesus is not the specifics of how to pray right here. It's who is God? How does God feel about you? If you think he's distant and uncaring, you'll go to ridiculous lengths to try to get his attention when you don't need to. If you see him as angry, you'll like a telemarketer ready to scream at you. I'll leave him alone. If you think he's petty or may not care about you, if you think you're too small for him to bother with, then prayer probably isn't something you even bother with. But here, Jesus is anchoring prayer and saying, what matters most is what you think about God. If you can get it right in your head of who he is and how he thinks about you, prayer isn't a guilt trip. It changes. It's something different. And actually, Jesus' brother, James, kind of talks about this similarly. In James chapter 1, there's a verse that I think is often misused, and I want to talk about it. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, and we're not talking about wisdom specifically, but he says, you should ask God. So now we're talking about prayer, asking God for something, who gives generously to all without finding fault. That is not a description of the pagan deities, right? But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. Now, just a moment of truth here. When I was little, I grew up in a church tradition that taught me that prayer was a little bit more like a vending machine. People call it the name and claim it movement, where if you do this, God has to do this. And if it didn't happen, you didn't believe enough, because James says you gotta believe. And I would think of prayer as like, being constipated on the toilet, gotta believe. If I just believe enough, then it'll happen. And if it doesn't happen, what did I do wrong? I failed, That's misunderstanding what James is saying here. He's not giving you an insight into the exact buttons you gotta push to make God do something. He's saying, when you pray, you have to approach God understanding who God is. Not just believe like, I believe you're going to give it to me. I believe you're going to give it to me. It's, no, this is my belief about God's nature, his character. When I come to God and ask for things, I'm doing it because I know who he is, because I understand his heart. James says that's how you approach God. If you approach God thinking, oh, don't smite me, I just really need something, you're completely missing what it means to know and love God. You're completely missing what it means for God to know and love you. And that just makes prayer ineffective. I can sort of picture in my mind how I would feel if one of my kids were like, Dad, please don't spank me. Can I just please have a glass of water? Like, what? Why would, like, what? How horrible am I that you think you need to talk to me like that? It's a misunderstanding of the relationship. And Jesus is like, if your kids ask for the basic necessities of life, bread and fish, the most fundamental diet of those people, you're not going to give them a stick and a snake. When your kids come to you and say, can I have some water? You're not going to be like, get out of my face, right? You might say that when they ask for a new, PlayStation every 9 minutes. You shouldn't, though. But Jesus is giving us the reason, the motivation here. He's saying, what you think about the gods is not true. You sometimes might feel like you're afraid to approach him because you're not sure who he is or what he's like. Just like, let me tell you what he's like. The same way that you would feel if your kids came and asked you for the most basic necessities of life, how quickly would you want to help them and give them? That is how God feels about you. And even though none of you would ever call your gods good, loving, or faithful, that's who Jesus reveals to us. He's not like what you think your gods are. And where this it really creates an interesting dynamic. What we find is at the heart of paganism, the reason why it's so messed up is because, number one, those gods don't exist. They're not even real. But not only are they not real, what they are just a mirror image of ourselves. Paganism created gods in humanity's own broken image. We just created these beings up in the sky that look just like we do. And because we're broken, because we're evil, because we blow up at people on the phone and we get really mad and we're like, I don't want to, we assume that other people must be like that. We assume the gods must be like that. If I was rich and petty and all-powerful, I wouldn't want to help a bunch of peons, so why would they help me? We assume that because we've created those gods in our own image. We've made them to be ourselves. We've created them in our imagination, and all we've done is put ourselves up in a powerful position, and we look at ourselves and if I was all-powerful, I'd be a jerk too. And it makes sense because that's who we are internally. And yet, here's Jesus coming to us and saying, I need you to rethink this. Because the imaginary gods that you've created, who are a reflection of your own brokenness, are not real. but the one who truly created you is. And now Jesus says, let me reveal him to you. Jesus comes to us and says, everything that you think about your petty views of God, your jealousy, your anger, your silliness, is not who I am. Let me show you who I really am. The great thing about what it means to be a follower of Jesus is not that he gave us a new list of rules. It's that he's actually showing us what God is like, because most of the world is very confused. Jesus is saying, this is who God is. This is who God is. This is who God is. And you can open the pages of Scripture and you can read and see the life of Jesus, and you're like, that's not who I thought the gods were. And it begins to change and transform the way that you even want to approach him, the way that you think about him. It moves from guilt and fear to something completely different. You hear things like, God gives grace freely out of his love, not by human work or effort. And you think to yourself, wait, so you're just going to give me favor and love, and I don't have to do anything? I don't have to like wave my arms and do a rain dance or something. You just, what? That seems so strange. It seems so counterintuitive. Why would you just give me favor and love and not make me work for it? I would make me work for it. And God's like, I'm not you. The gods you make up are you. I'm not. And you can imagine the people hearing this for the first time, who spent their entire lives doing all this crazy stuff, wondering, laying in bed at night, fearful, is anyone out there? Is anyone going to help me? What do I have to do? Name it. I'll give my own kids if I have to. And someone comes and says, actually, it's all nonsense. The one God who created all things, who holds all things together with the power of his word, already loves you, already cares about you, and is already giving you grace, and you don't have to do anything to earn it. And you say, that's really good news. Yep, let's just write a book and call it Good News. Gospel. Where the pagan gods are distant and uncaring, our God knows the hairs on your head. He knows every word you're going to say before you say it. He knows every need you have. You don't have to go to him and explain to him that your kid is sick in bed. He already knows, and he already cares. You don't have to use a bunch of big words trying to get his attention. He's already listening. He is already listening. Every time you approach God in prayer, he is already listening. Why? I don't know. I don't know why he cares about me. The psalmist makes the same question. He says, what am I that you're mindful of me? I'm nothing. I'm dust. And yet you listen. Why? I don't understand why you love me. It's crazy. He's like, that's just who I am. Or the pagan gods are fickle and may or may not listen or do what you ask. Our God is always faithful. From generation to generation, he's never changing. He never lies. He never gives up. He never goes back on his word. He never fails. That God is on your side. Where the pagan gods may not be able to do anything about what you're asking anyway. Our God spoke and stars came into existence. Our God breathed and life came from dust. He can do anything, and he's on your side. Where no one would ever describe a pagan God as being good, our God said, I am love. You want to know what love is? Just look at me. He's the source of goodness. And where the pagan gods were all selfish and self-centered and only concerned with themselves unless you worked as hard as possible to get on their good side, God gave up his godhood and became a human being and died on a piece of wood for you. He's on your side. And he did that while you were still yet sinners. He gave his life up for you while you were still in rebellion against him. This God is on your side. He loves you. He cares about you. I'm not calling us to be a people of prayer out of guilt. I'm calling us to be a people of prayer because it is the only logical response to everything that just came out of my mouth. The most powerful being in the world, in the universe, loves you and cares about you and wants good things for you. And so Jesus says, so yeah, come and ask. Come talk to him. Why not? He's on your side. Ask, search, seek, knock. Because remember who you're talking to. He cares about you. You don't need to put on a show. You don't need to know the magic words. He loves you already. He loves you already. And you might be sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, oh, Pete, seriously, man, that sounds nice, but you don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've done. I don't know what you've done. I don't care what you've done. But the scriptures tell us it doesn't matter. He said it doesn't matter. God said it doesn't matter. I love you. You have my attention. I don't care what you've done. I love you. You have my attention. Let's talk. That's amazing. That's incredible. Why aren't we praying? Why aren't we talking to him? And as Kyle said earlier, we try to make this a space on Sunday morning that we can come and connect with him. That we can worship him and say thank you. Not because if I worship hard enough, maybe he'll love me. No, worship because he already loves you. And it's awesome and it's great, so I want to say thank you. Spend time sitting quietly just talking to him because, wow, the one who holds the universe in his hands wants to talk to you. You. All your silliness and imperfection, he loves you and he cares about you. So we as Christians need to be people of prayer, not because of guilt, but because, man, that's amazing. You are missing out if you're not praying. Would you stand with me? We're going to sing one more song, and maybe this is a song that you just stand there and take a moment to talk to him. Maybe it's this moment that you are so overwhelmed with reminding yourself how good he is that you just need to tell him thank you. Whatever it is, let's give this time to him as we close our service together.